Welcome to the Unlist. Today we're talking about ambergris. Yep, ambergris. A material I've touched upon in other videos, particularly my videos on animalics and my video on the specific synthetic material ambroxan, more properly known as ambroxide, ambroxan being a trade name. Well, without ambergris, there would be no ambroxan because ambroxan was created primarily as a substitute to ambergris, since ambergris is exorbitantly expensive, since it must be found, it can't be grown or cultivated, and its trade is illegal in some countries. So years and years of research ended up developing ambroxide, which is a molecular reconstruction of a particular odorant, the primary odorant of ambergris, actually. And, well, ambroxide itself proved quite expensive to synthesize for a long time, so even once it was discovered, it wouldn't be for another 30, 40 years before it finally became a popular and common perfume material. Ambergris itself, however, has always maintained a certain allure, a certain mystique. It's usually a hallmark of luxury, of refinement. It's a way of saying our perfume is better than yours, because if you can flex that your fragrance contains real ambergris, then that's like, you know, eating truffles, like the kind you send pigs after to find in the woods. It's along those lines. It's a scarce thing that the scarcity drives the price, thus drives the perception. It's another thing like Veblen goods, right? Conspicuous consumption, where the price of something, the price of something is self-justifying. It's expensive, therefore it's expensive. Therefore, if you buy it, that makes you better than someone else because you can afford to have it and they can't. So it's not even about the material quality or the actual enjoyment of the item. It's about the fact that you can just buy it and not care. Someone else can't. So it's that pride of ownership. It's that showing of power by wasting your money on it. Now, don't get it twisted. Ambergris does smell great. I love the smell of real, natural ambergris, and therefore, I think ambergris is a little more than just conspicuous consumption, a little more than just flexing. But in a day and age where we have so many more than adequate synthetic substitutes for it, much the same way we do with civet, right? There are so many good civet replacers out there that smell almost indistinguishable from real civet paste. Same holds true for Tonkin musk that comes from deer. There really is no conscionable reason to use real ambergris anymore from that point of view. From an ethical standpoint, there's not really a good justifiable reason to still comb beaches for these little nuggets of whale vomit. But that said, I can also understand why people still do, why they still go out, comb the beaches, and look for the stuff, and then find it, and then cook it down, tincture it, make it into perfume, do whatever they're going to do. Because it's that sort of the allure of knowing it's rare, knowing it's precious, and ambergris well and truly is precious because there are only so many whales in the world, guys, and it has to come from sperm whales too. It can't come from blue whales or humpback whales. It has to come from sperm whales, and they have to vomit it up. So how many times in a year is the sperm whale going to vomit up a chunk of ambergris? And then the other thing is the ambergris just can't be used in its fresh state. It has to sit on a beach. It has to spend some time in the ocean first. Then it has to wash up on shore and continue to oxidize, continue to age, get bombarded with UV from the sun, roll around in sand, pick up all the smells from the beach, and then continue to dry and just about fossilize, almost. before it is finally ready to be used. So all of that, the fact that it's got to be randomly coughed up by a creature of which there are very few number left in the world. We have hunted a lot of whales. Some of that hunting was, unfortunately, to secure more ambergris because human beings are fucking stupid. And the whalers who were hunting the whales for ambergris didn't realize that it was unusable. Coming right out of the whale's stomach is unusable. They didn't know that. But then whales were also hunted for their blubber, for their meat, for other things, for whale oil. So it's not necessarily like it was just the ambergris. But the demand for ambergris didn't exactly help. So that's where the illegal trade comes from. A lot of countries, including the United States, banned the trade of ambergris as a way to discourage unnecessary whaling. So now you know kind of sort of the background of ambergris. Well, historically speaking, it's had many more uses than just as a perfume material. It's primarily known as a material for fine fragrances, yes, but like a lot of animalic substances, it also found its way into food, found its way into medicine, found its way into a number of religious practices and sort of holistic, homeopathic, medicinal practices that were neither here nor there, unfortunately. But pieces of ambergris going all the way back to the times of the ancient Egyptians, people. So we're going thousands of years back. All the way back to the times of the ancient Egyptians, ambergris was used as incense and in religious rituals. I'm guessing in worship of the Egyptian pantheon, so Anubis and such, Ra and all that. So fast forward a few thousand years, and it would still be used in a lot of the Persian Gulf area. The Turks liked flavoring their coffee with it. I know that sounds a little weird, but they liked flavoring their coffee with ambergris. Also, the ancient inhabitants of what is now the United Kingdom, so England, but the ancient inhabitants of that island liked to use it to flavor their alcohol. So, and it wasn't your standard whiskeys and things, because we're talking, like I said, 1,000+ years ago, but they used to put the ambergris pieces into whatever kind of spirits they were distilling to give it a flavor. I guess along the same lines how juniper and such goes into gin, right? Well, I'm not saying ambergris was a really ancient gin recipe ingredient, but maybe it sort of was. Fast forward a couple more centuries, and we would still see ambergris used for certain rums, okay? There was a certain type of rum that was being made with ambergris in it. Very expensive, very, very luxurious. And cigarettes. We're talking right around the 19th century when cigarettes were still hand-rolled, right? They weren't, you didn't buy them by a package or by a carton. They were, you had to make them yourself and roll the ends, right? Well, a lot of people liked dipping the tobacco or dipping the end of the cigarette in some kind of ambergris oil or some sort of ambergris odorant material, get it in the cigarette before they roll it up. So they had ambergris scented cigarettes. That was the thing they did with the ambergris. And of course, if we're talking medicinal stuff here, then during the times of the Black Plague, a lot of people thought walking around with a chunk of ambergris, like on a pomander or something, having a chunk of ambergris would actually protect them from the bubonic plague, thinking that catching the plague was related to the smell of the corpses that had already, well, been people who died from the plague. So they think by having the ambergris around their neck and smelling the ambergris, rather than the smell of all the death around them, that they would avoid catching the plague, right? Interesting stuff, guys. Now, ambergris in its natural form is still a very popular material for perfumery in North Africa and a lot of the Middle East. And the vast majority of ambergris that is still being found on beaches, that is still being refined, is going to that market. It's not going to the Western European fragrance market. It's not going to the United States. It's not going to Russia. It's not going to China. It's going to the Middle East. And well, there's a reason for that. Obviously, there's a lot of wealth in the Middle East. There are a lot of kings and sultans and princes who basically have these hegemonies. They operate, these different countries: Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Dubai, the UAE. I ain't got to tell you, y'all already know, okay? They have the money to snarf up all the ambergris from the market. And because they have literally an ancient cultural tradition for using it, they have 1,000+ years history of using it. They've got both the historical precedent and the money to make sure that they take the lion's share. So they do. Most of it goes there. That said, what little bit of it does get to escape that market and come up into Western Europe does find its way into French fragrances and English fragrances, British fragrances. But in the case of that, it's typically just a very, very microdosed material because of the expense. Like I said, they don't exactly bathe in it in the Middle East, but obviously oil perfume and attar perfume is much more concentrated and uses much more of a natural material than when you're diluting an alcohol, right? When you're diluting an alcohol, you can stretch your materials a lot further. So they basically had to do that with the ambergris, the classic French fragrances, even going back to the 1800s. Again, the birth of houses like Guerlain, the birth of houses like Houbigant and such. They would just take little pieces of the ambergris that they could get, and then they would make their tinctures, and they would stretch the living shit out of the ambergris because they couldn't get much of it. They had to really stretch it. And they did. And it became a fixative. It became a very popular fixative, actually, for a lot of these high-end French fragrances. And of course, I don't want to leave the UK houses out of this. So the old UK houses like Floris and such, they used it too. Penhaligon's, GOF Trumper, they all used it too. Okay, Grossmith, same thing. But a little bit had to go a long way. And it's one of the things that sort of created the need to find an alternative, because ambergris was just too damn good at its job. You have to understand, you have to look at it from the perspective of a perfumer from 150, 200 years ago, okay? Look at it this way. Every other musk choice you could possibly use in the 1800s had a very off-putting, very strong, offensive odor that you then had to bury underneath other materials. Top notes, heart notes. You had to build up your fragrance in such a way that the unpleasant elements of your civet, of your castoreum, of your hyraceum, of whatever fatty nonsense you were using as a musk, those unpleasant elements were blended into the florals, the spices, the citrus notes, and it became pleasant. It's literally the existence of Jiki, the existence of Sheep Dakota, the existence of all of these older perfumes from the turn of the 20th century. They use the animalic musks because they are the most cost-effective musks they can use at that point in time. But they don't want their fragrances smelling like shit or smelling like crotch or smelling like whatever, so they have to pile on everything else. With ambergris, you don't have to. Ambergris was the miracle material of that era. You did not have to hide hardly any of the qualities of ambergris. Yes, some of the lower quality stuff, the younger ambergris, starting with black. There's 3 grades. Before I go any further, there are 3 grades. There's black, gray, and white. Black is basically the youngest. It's still dried out. It's still spent time in the water, spent time on the beach, but it hasn't aged for nearly as long. It has the most fecal aroma of all the ambergris types. It is the closest thing to a truly animalic musk note, is the black ambergris. But it's also the cheapest one. So a lot of those Middle Eastern attars I was telling you about, a lot of those Middle Eastern perfumes that still rock the real ambergris, they're using the black stuff because they can't afford the gray and white stuff. The gray and the white stuff is so astronomically expensive and rare because it has to literally be left untouched. It has to sit undiscovered for a very long time. And with the rate of them looking and combing the beach for more, ambergris doesn't tend to sit on the beach long enough to become gray or white amber anymore, like it may have 200, 300 years ago. It gets found too quickly now. So a lot of that ends up being the black ambergris, and guess where it goes? It goes into that stuff. The gray ambergris, though, which is considered the true beginning of the good stuff, the true beginning of the real ambergris that we know in classic French perfumery, this is the stuff with what is described as the baby's breath smell, or some folks will call it halitosis, where it smells like just slightly unpleasant breath, right? Baby's breath, again, halitosis, bad breath. But overwhelmingly, it has a salty, marine, fresh smell. That baby's breath, halitosis breath, is sort of the undercurrent. It's just sort of in the background lurking, but it doesn't screw the pooch. It doesn't break the deal. Then you've got the white ambergris, which is the real ancient stuff, the stuff that's been sat on a desert island somewhere, and it's been ignored and finally gets unearthed after maybe 100 years of sitting there. And all funkiness, fecalness, bad breathiness has kind of aged its way out of the white ambergris, completely aged its way out. And that stuff is actually the basis for what ambroxan is, ambroxide, all of the various synthetic ambergris materials. Because since the halitosis, fecal notes are all gone from the white ambergris, all you get is the saltiness, the mineral smell, the freshness, the basis for most of our aquatic perfumes, right? That aquatic, beachy, salty, sandy smell like Aqua de Jo and cool water and such. All of those are really trying to replicate a white ambergris smell. And you find that stuff, imagine being the guy in like 1825 or 1830, you being the guy that finds that chunk of white ambergris. Or you're the rich noble who can afford to buy a perfume oil based on white ambergris. Imagine walking through Victorian London, okay, or wherever, Gilded Age New York, and you're rocking the white ambergris. You have this salty, fresh, oceanic smell about you that no one else has ever smelled in their life. It is pure magic, right? It is like traveling back in time, right, 200 years, while you're wearing something like, I don't know, like Cell Marine by Healy. You're wearing something like that, but you're in a time machine going back 200 years, rocking that. Or a Piece Marine by Hermes. You're wearing a Piece Marine by Hermes and then going back in time and walking around Victorian London wearing that smell. Could you imagine the heads you would turn? Just sheer wow factor on people's faces, never having smelled anything like that in their life. And that's why that stuff would command a fortune, but also the most rare, the most desirable. And if you had that as a fixative, or going back to what I started, if you had that material, or even the gray amber, like I said, a little more halitosis, a little more bad breath, big deal. You had the gray or the white ambergris as your perfume base, and you could put rose oil on top of that, bergamot oil on top of that, you could put lavender on top of that, whatever you wanted. You built a perfume with an ambergris base. It was like the hand of God coming down. It was literally like the hand of God coming down. You know, a big beam of light shining down on your perfume shop. Oh. And that's why there were just people who went crazy for that stuff. They went nuts. They literally endangered the existence of whales. They endangered the existence of these creatures because of this smell, this aphrodisiac smell. It was considered an aphrodisiac, okay? Because people would smell it and they'd be like, oh, because they had never smelled anything like it before. It was revelatory, guys. It was absolutely revelatory. Now you can kind of understand. And until white musks came along, until these transparent materials like galaxolide, Isoe Super, ambroxan, until those materials came along, there was no way to create a smell like that with any of the other conventional musks or materials perfumers had. For centuries, ambergris was the only way, and it had to be that gray or white ambergris. It couldn't be the black stuff. It was the only way. So that is why the mystique, why the allure, why the vaunted nature of the material still exists today in 2024. Granted, nowadays you can do that synthetically. I have smelled real ambergris. I have a custom blended perfume made for me that contains real ambergris. And I've also smelled some very good synthetic ambergris oils. I do have a very low concentration, so it's not a perfume material, but I have a very low concentration wearable essential oil that is ambergris. So it is an ambergris, I guess, suspension in some kind of a neutral oil. And it's lovely. When I decide not to wear commercial perfume, when I decide not to wear, an alcohol-based perfume, I will break out my ambergris oil. I'll put a little bit of it on the back of my neck. Then I will layer some damask rose oil I have over top of that. And then some bergamot oil. So 1, 2, 3. The ambergris, which it's going to be a bit expensive, granted. It's going to cost almost the price of an actual commercial bottle perfume. So you're getting close to 3 digits. But if you're willing to plunk it down and get it low concentration ambergris oil, wearable oil, you get that. A little tiny bit goes a long way. We're talking like 1 fingertip is all you need. 1 fingertip is all you need. Put that on the back of your neck, layer it with some high quality rose oil, and then layer it with some bergamot oil. That's it. The bergamot, the rose, and the ambergris together. You, sir, are smelling like a proper Victorian gent. You are smelling like you are ready to go see a troubadour or a vaudeville act or something. You are ready to go see some chamber music, eat a big fat piece of beef Wellington, all right, listen to a violinist, or go get your face shaved over by Sweeney Todd. Just don't let him dump you down in the chute or whatever. But that's what you'll smell like with that combination, the ambergris oil, the rose oil, the bergamot. You can put a little bit of lavender in there if you want to dandy it up. Get some lavender EO, some essential oil, and just do the ambergris, bergamot, rose, lavender, those 4 oils. You can't layer too many crazy oils together because it's not a perfume, guys. It doesn't blend. These things don't blend like perfumes do. So you got to keep it. I prefer 3, no more than 3, maybe 4, but you're going to play with oils. That's how you do it. Now, ambergris in commercial perfumes, actual real ambergris, very hit or miss. Very hit or miss. I mean, Guerlain professes to have some things. Some of your niche perfumers, more like your artisanal and independent brands, profess to have some things. But it's hard to really verify, right? Because if they're using such tiny fractions of the stuff in the perfume, there's no way you can really verify. Because here's the thing, guys. Here's the rub. You can make a synthetic proxy of real ambergris with the salt, with the muskiness, with the halitosis breath. You can do it all with synthetics. And blindfolded, you won't know the difference. That is how good we have gotten in 2024. That is how good we have gotten at replicating ambergris, because we've had thousands of years of human history we have had with this material. So again, I stress, you don't need the real deal to enjoy the smell. So if you're looking for a perfume on the market, commercial perfume, alcohol perfume, and it says it contains ambergris, grain of salt, guys. Throw the salt over the shoulder. Don't do like Salt Bae and sprinkle it this way. Throw it over your shoulder. Otherwise, good luck, have fun. Hopefully you enjoyed this video and learned something. I'll catch you next time.